After 9/11, the U.S. established a global surveillance network to capture millions of digital nodes and communications in real time. The most wanted man on Earth survived by exploiting a blind spot. He disconnected from the digital grid, adopting a zero-emission model of operational security. Osama bin Laden used this analog isolation to hide from the world's most sophisticated intelligence agencies. Tracking him required a pivot away from electronic signals and back toward classical, high-risk physical surveillance. The following decade became a process of narrowing that global search space down to a single 38,000 square foot compound. This transition required a rigorous analytical framework, intelligence lifecycle management, to process millions of random data points into actionable military targeting. Locating the target required the patience of classical spycraft, proving a zero-emission target is only found by slowing down to match its analog pace. The investigation began in September 2001 with the rapid aggregation of flight manifests and visa records. A delayed connecting flight in Boston left behind a bag belonging to hijacker Mohammed Atta. Inside, investigators found the training manuals and planning documents that linked the attacks to al-Qaeda. The trail continued through wire transfers from Dubai, placing the funding for the attacks directly in the mountains of Afghanistan by December. By mid-December, U.S. forces had cornered bin Laden in the Tora Bora mountain range, using conventional tracking and airstrikes to pin him down. During the siege, bin Laden used an unsecured radio to contact local forces, negotiating a false ceasefire that halted the American bombing for 24 hours. He used that window to escape the perimeter, crossing the Pakistani border on horseback while the digital dragnet remained static. Following the escape at Tora Bora, he severed all electronic ties. He stopped using radios, discarded his cell phones, and cut internet connections, leaving no digital signature for agencies to track. The escape proved that overwhelming military force cannot succeed without the support of continuous, real-time intelligence tracking. Between 2002 and 2009, the target relocated to the federally administered tribal areas of Pakistan. This was a semi-autonomous zone where mainstream legal systems didn't apply, making it highly resistant to digital tracking. Bin Laden built an analog network. He relied exclusively on two trusted human couriers to physically transport handwritten messages to the outside world. The CIA desperately tried to penetrate this closed loop. They recruited a doctor named Humam al-Balawi, turning him into a double agent tasked with getting close to al-Qaeda's leadership. Balawi slowly earned their trust. In December 2009, he contacted the CIA, claiming he finally had physical location data on bin Laden that he could only deliver in person at the highly secure Camp Chapman. Because of the perceived value of his intelligence, standard security protocols were bypassed. Balawi walked into a meeting with the CIA's top leadership and detonated a suicide vest, killing 7 key officers. In intelligence, this is known as operational friction. It is the deadly, unpredictable risk inherent in relying on human sources on the ground, instead of remote digital surveillance. Penetrating a zero-emission network required putting human lives directly in the line of fire. The operational cost of classical human intelligence was severe. Fast forward to August 2010. In the chaotic, densely populated city of Peshawar, the first major crack in the case finally appeared. The target's primary courier, Ibrahim, broke years of strict protocol. Out of laziness, he turned on his personal cell phone in a public area for a brief, unsecured call. The CIA immediately triangulated that signal, but instead of moving in to capture him on the spot, they exercised extreme restraint. They needed to see where he would lead them. A physical surveillance team followed Ibrahim's white Suzuki Jeep as he drove out of Peshawar, tracking him all the way to a suburban neighborhood called Bilal Town in Abbottabad. The vehicle pulled into a massive, heavily fortified compound sitting right in the middle of a residential area. A decade of searching, backed by a multi-billion-dollar intelligence infrastructure, ultimately hinged on a single moment of human laziness by a courier. The destination was a 38,000 square foot compound. Curiously, it was built just miles away from a major Pakistani military academy. The CIA began compiling a document called The Anatomy of a Lead. Analysts took every micro data point they could observe and fed it into a probability model to determine the likelihood of the target being inside. The architectural anomalies were glaring. The property was surrounded by 18-foot military-grade walls topped with barbed wire, and the third-floor balconies were shielded by opaque, 7-foot privacy enclosures. Then there was the lack of communication infrastructure. Despite housing what appeared to be a wealthy family, the compound had no internet service and no wired telephone lines. Running an undercover operation from a nearby rented safe house, the CIA used advanced optics to capture thermal human signatures radiating through the concrete walls. They noticed a tall man who regularly paced the top-floor balcony but never stepped into view. Using a technique called shadow analysis, analysts calculated the length of the shadow cast on the wall, determining the pacing man was between 5'5" and 6'8". To get definitive proof, the CIA deployed human intelligence. They funded a local doctor to run a fake hepatitis B vaccination drive in the neighborhood, hoping to secure DNA samples from the compound's children. The couriers turned the doctor away at the gate. The drive failed to collect any DNA, but the intense, highly defensive reaction of the residents only increased the probability model's confidence rating. The CIA couldn't prove the target was there with a single piece of hard evidence. Instead, they had to build an airtight statistical probability entirely out of shadows and deliberate silence. By early 2011, the intelligence phase transitioned into tactical planning. CIA Director Leon Panetta and top military brass presented their findings to the president. Inside the Situation Room, President Obama reviewed the options. He rejected a B-2 bomber strike. Dropping massive ordnance would destroy any DNA evidence needed to confirm the kill, and carried unacceptable risks of civilian collateral damage. Instead, he authorized Operation Neptune Spear. This would be a high-risk, unilateral special operations raid executed by Navy SEALs. It meant crossing a sovereign border without informing the Pakistani government. The tactical coordination required extreme precision. 2 stealth-modified Blackhawks would carry the primary assault team into Abbottabad, while larger CH-47 Chinooks held back in the Swat Valley, acting as a heavily armed quick reaction force. But the moment the raid began, things went wrong. The first Black Hawk encountered unexpected downward airflow generated by the high concrete walls, an aerodynamic phenomenon known as settling with power, causing the aircraft to violently crash upon entry. Tactical military operations must be engineered with overlapping redundancies precisely to survive this kind of inevitable, real-time operational friction. The team survived the crash and continued the mission. Immediately pivoting from the crash, the operators adapted. They used C4 explosives to breach the exterior gates and began a systematic floor-by-floor clearing of the main house. Pushing up the narrow stairwell to the 3rd floor, the SEALs confronted the tall man they had tracked in the shadows, neutralizing the primary target. With the target down, the phase of sensitive site exploitation began. Operators scoured the analog stronghold, recovering hard drives, handwritten journals, and digital media to map out the broader terrorist network. Under extreme time pressure, they executed multi-layered identification protocols. They measured his height, interrogated family members on site, and collected blood samples for definitive DNA matching. Once identity was visually confirmed, the radio call went out over secure satellite lines, back to the Commander-in-Chief in Washington, Geronimo EKIA, enemy killed in action. The successful breach was the culmination of a 10-year shift. Defeating a completely unplugged target required the patience of classical human intelligence, the analytical rigor of statistical probability modeling, and highly redundant tactical execution.
If you value clarity over chaos, explore more on Clear Lens X.